Hi, I'm Kyle McClinigan here with the Eagle with our guest Rick Davis to discuss his campaign for Texas House District 14. Thanks for being with us, Rick.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. And so this first question, kind of simple but also really important. Why did you decide to run for House District 14?
Well, it's actually been a dream of mine for a very long time to run for a state representative. I've had this dream since I was in law school in the late 80s and the early 90s. I'm very civic-minded, and I want to give back to the community. And I thought maybe since Mr. Rainey's retiring, maybe now's the time. So I'm asking the voters for that job.
Okay, great. And so what do you think are some of the biggest issues facing Texans in District 14, and how do you hope to address them if elected as their state representative?
Well, presently, I think the biggest concern for the whole state is border security, because we are practically being invaded under Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution. The federal government is obligated to protect states from invasion, and the Biden administration clearly is not doing that. In fact, they're allowing it to happen, and they're making things difficult for everyone across the country. Now, that's really a statewide issue. But as far as issues in the district itself, District 14, there are, of course, the issues that affect us affect people all across the state. People are talking a lot about property taxes. I really dislike property taxes. And I've actually run for this office before, back in 2010. In 2010, I had heard that Fred Brown was not going to run for re-election, and Buddy Wynn had decided to run. And after he announced, then I decided to file for the post. Then Fred Brown decided to run after all. And also Blanche Brick. We had a very cordial civil race. But I looked at some old articles. And this is from 2010. In fact, we had a forum. It was hosted by WTAW, and the Eagle also did a story on it. And I think it's interesting because it says some things, or it quotes me from saying things back in 2010 that I still believe today, and I still would like to argue for. For example, in the Eagle on January 26 of 2010, I was quoted on this forum article. It says, Davis, a former district judge who currently has a private legal practice, said he supported the government living within its means and not paying for things that it can't afford. Law enforcement and education should be priorities, he said. He also advocated an overhaul of how Texans pay taxes and repeatedly said he dislikes property taxes. And here's a quote, if I could eliminate all property taxes in exchange for a comparable increase in sales tax, I would support that, he said. So that's how I felt then. That's how I still feel now. I think property taxes are bad. They're unfair. They're arbitrary. They favor the rich. And here's why I say this. Wealthy businesses can afford teams of lawyers to litigate against appraisal districts and fight about everything. And one year, 2006, was an exceptionally litigious year. Valero had filed, I think, 150 lawsuits against 46 appraisal districts, arguing about all sorts of things. So it's all over the property valuations and what constituted business property and how it should be valued and so forth. And this is very inefficient. It's very inefficient. And, the average person just can't afford to hire a lawyer to litigate over their property valuation and so forth. Furthermore, Texas is growing by about 1,000 people a day. That's about 1 million people every 3 years. And a lot of folks are coming in from other states. I mean, apart from the people who are coming here across the border that are not supposed to be, there's a lot of people that are coming here lawfully because we have such a great state. A lot of people are coming from California because they're fleeing that state. And they're driving the values of property up. And what happens is, even if the tax rates stay the same, people's property taxes increase just because the valuation goes up so much. And average folks, hardworking folks, it affects the poor the worst. And a lot of them, they can no longer afford their property taxes, so they have to sell their houses. And I think that's very bad. I favor consumption taxes. Now, to overhaul and change from, or to eliminate the property tax system, it's going to be hard. It's going to be a lot of work. It wouldn't surprise me if the bill that was introduced to do that would be several hundred pages. But here's something that's important to recognize. Up until 1982, Texas had a state property tax. And in fact, there's a very good article about the long history of property taxes in Texas on the comptroller's website for the state of Texas. And they talk about how property taxes were abolished, state property taxes, that is, were abolished in 1982. So if the entire state government can revise the way it operates and the way that it is funded, I'm sure that we can also do it for the school districts. And regarding the schools, I favor central funding, local control. Central funding, local control. So let's just say, for example, we had, like for example, this past year, I had to pay property tax on my house. I paid 1.5% of the value of my home, and I have to do that every year. My wife and I have to do that every year. So we don't have sales tax on the sale of real estate. What if we had a very modest sales tax on the sale of real estate? I would jump all over that. If I could buy a house and pay 2 to 2.5% sales tax, but never have to pay a property tax, I would love that. There would have to be money coming from other sources as well. We pay 20 cents a gallon on our diesel, and that's a state tax. 20 cents a gallon on our gasoline, that's also a state tax. What if we made it 23 cents? What if we made it 25 cents or something like that? It would be this project would involve a whole lot of math, because you have to properly fund the school districts. You have to properly fund the counties that rely on property taxes. And of course, there's a sliver of revenue for the cities and the towns that come from property taxes as well. So we'll have to be creative. It's going to be a challenge, but I think it can be done, because the whole state did it as far as the Texas state property taxes back in 1982. And I'd like to push for that. Now, about schools, regarding schools, school choice is a big issue right now. I definitely favor local control. I'm not at all against the public school system. In fact, I'm very much in favor of it. I had an excellent primary education. I was in Fort Bend Independent School District, went to Dulles High School. There were 871 people in my graduating class. I was 55 out of 871. I was able to get 6 years of science in and 6 years of math in at high school, because I took 2 classes. I took American History and World History and 2 summer school classes to free up some time during the year. So I had a great primary education. My wife and I have 6 children. My wife also she's from Richardson. She had a great primary education as well. She's got a degree in biochemistry from Texas A&M. But all 6 of our children went through the College Station Independent School District, and they were very well prepared for Texas A&M. 6 out of 6 Davis children have Texas Aggie rings, so we're very proud of that. So we're a big-time Aggie family. So I'm not at all against the public school system by any means, but I do know there's parts of the state where the education system is really lacking, or it is really bad. And so I favor a situation where a parent or parents if they can pull their kids out of a bad school situation and educate them in a different means. I mean, it's important to educate our children, but I favor parental rights in that regard and parental control.
Okay, yeah, and you had mentioned it already a bit about the U.S.-Mexico border, and obviously, as you mentioned, there's been some friction, to say the least, between Governor Abbott and the federal government about kind of how to address the border. So if you were elected, what do you think some steps that the state kind of needs to take in order to secure the border?
Well, I applaud Governor Abbott in the way that he's been handling this, because he's handling it in a constitutional fashion. The 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which is the last amendment in our 10 Bill of Rights, basically says that this is a paraphrase, all rights not accorded to the federal government are reserved to the states or to the people respectively. So states have rights under the Constitution, and they're specifically, anything that wasn't given to the federal government is reserved to the states. So I want us to do everything that we can to legitimately and constitutionally assert those rights to protect Texas's border from illegal invasions. And in fact, Governor Abbott has cited Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, that's a section I cited earlier, where the federal government is obligated to protect states from invasion. It specifically says those words. And so we just need to insist that that be done.
Okay, yeah. And you talked a good deal about schools and school choice. And of course, John Rainey, the last District 14 representative, as one of his last acts, kind of authored an amendment that got rid of the school voucher program in Abbott's most recent attempt to pass such a program. But with all that being said, would you be in favor of such a voucher-like program? I know you said you kind of talked about it a bit, but on the record, would you be in favor of that?
Well, if I have to answer the question very briefly, I would have to say yes. Okay. I don't like the idea of calling it vouchers. I think,
of course, yeah.
I would like to find a reasonable way to accomplish it while ensuring that all children are properly educated. Mm-hmm. Now, getting back to the issue of what I said before about central funding, local control. I want local school districts to control how the children are educated, who the teachers and principals are that are hired and fired and so forth. And those people need to be accountable to the local populace. Mm-hmm. So I favor local control. But if you think about it, if we have central funding, and we collect taxes, for example, a little bit more money on all of the gasoline sales and all of the diesel sales and so forth. And it's going to have to come from several different places. But if we have that central funding but local control, that solves the Robin Hood problem. If we have provisions in the law that say school districts are sent money based on their per capita student attendance, So that would solve a host of problems. It would also stop a whole lot of inefficient litigation over that. I remember Edgewood versus Kirby. I remember all these cases that have been litigated over the years, and the Texas Supreme Court basically telling the legislature, you got to do something to fix this. I think that would solve a host of problems to have central funding, local control.
Okay, yeah. And we already spoke a bit about how you would like to eliminate property taxes. I had a question on that, but you kind of covered it.
Yes.
So I wanted to move on to, in your opinion, what is the defining issue of your campaign?
Well, I'm the only one that I know of. Well, in fact, I have nothing against Paul Dyson. I don't know him that well. He seems like a fine fellow. Mm-hmm. He's talking about wanting to provide property tax relief. I want to eliminate property tax. Mm-hmm. I think that's a significant defining issue as far as issues go. That is probably the most important one. I think we probably agree on 80% of the issues, maybe even more. But that's something that is very important to me. I also want to improve election integrity. Mm-hmm. In Brazos County, I know a lot of the folks that work the elections, and we have a lot of good, honest folks to make sure that we have fair elections here. However, it's not that way everywhere in the state. There are places in other parts of the state where the elections are very unfair or even rigged or fraudulent. And if you think about it, if there's election fraud in another part of the state, it dilutes the voting power of the citizens in District 14. So I think that we need to have a much greater level of election integrity, where it's one citizen, one vote.
Okay, yeah, and that was really all the major questions I had, but I did want to give you the opportunity to go over some other key points that you think we might have missed, and also kind of what you think makes you stand out as a candidate in this race.
Well, I've got I'm older than Mr. Dyson. I mean, I've been licensed to practice law twice as long as he has. From everything I understand, he's a very bright lawyer, a very smart man. But I've got a lot of experience. My wife and I have 6 children. Our youngest graduated from Texas A&M in December of 2022. And I've also got over 8 years of judicial experience. And I've been in the courtroom a lot. I have seen how well-intended laws play out in ways that were not intended by the legislature. In fact, I've tried my first jury trial in a court of record 14 months out of law school. Lo and behold, I happened to have either the good fortune or the strange fortune of defending a man who was unjustly accused, I would add, of violating the then new stalking statute. It was an addition under Texas Penal Code 42.07. Well, the addition was 42.07A7. It was an addition to the telephone harassment statute, and it was very poorly written. And I looked at it, and my boss looked at it at the time before I went to trial, and we thought, how is that constitutional? Because it was based on a subjective opinion of the victim, whether the victim felt threatened, as opposed to a reasonable person feeling threatened. Mm-hmm. So I filed a motion to declare the statute unconstitutional. The trial judge denied it. We tried the case. We had a hung jury the first time in July of 1993, and then we tried it again in August of 1993. My client was acquitted, so there's nothing to appeal. But I felt a little gratified in 1996 when the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals decided Johnson versus State, and they determined that that very statute was in fact unconstitutional. It's since been written. It's since been rewritten, and it is now constitutional and it's now written right. But I could see these things playing out in court, or just in real life and in day-to-day litigation and so forth, where sometimes laws don't play out in the way that the legislature intended them. I think that would be a huge advantage going into the legislature.
Okay, yeah. Well, thank you so much again for coming by and answering some of our questions. We really appreciate it.
I really appreciate the opportunity.